Hi guys, it's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-fi, also known as Marc Zicree of Space Command, and I'm making this sci-fi commentary from Port Alfred, South Africa, where Elaine and I are working on the Lord Peter Hayne feature Subversive, which Elaine is writing, and we're producers on along with two producers in the UK. So we've been traveling around the UK and South Africa interviewing the people who were involved in the story, which took place in the early 60s in South Africa. And it's an amazing journey, but that is not what we're here to talk about, and that is not the capacity I'm talking about the subject today in. I am speaking as a writer for Star Trek, commenting on Star Trek Discovery. So first of all, let's give my credentials in terms of that. And if you haven't subscribed to the Mr. Sci-Fi YouTube channel or looked at some of the other Mr. Sci-Fi videos that I've posted over the last few years, we'll get into that, and there'll be some other ones that will be useful for you to watch that'll be pertinent to the commentary I'm making today. So first of all, let's talk about my Star Trek particulars. First of all, Star Trek debuted when I was 10, and it was the thing I'd been waiting for all my life, my 10 years of life. The moment the Man Trap aired the first episode of Star Trek, which was written by my friend-to-be George Clayton Johnson, I was hooked. And from then on, I watched every episode of Star Trek. I made notes on who the writers were. I later became friends with many of them, most of them, and learned my trade off of Twilight Zone and Star Trek and the Outer Limits, and wrote the Twilight Zone Companion. And the moment that Star Trek: The Next Generation first aired, I really wanted to contribute to that show, and essentially I did. In terms of Star Trek, I came up with the stories First Contact on Star Trek: The Next Generation, the episode, not the feature. And on DS9 I came up with Far Beyond the Stars, which is a very well-known episode. Then I went on to co-write with Michael Reeves and direct Star Trek New Voyages, also executive produce Star Trek New Voyages World Enough in Time, starring George Takei, which was nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula and won the TV Guide Award, and you can watch that in its entirety on Mr. Sci-Fi. I just posted it a few weeks ago, and it's gotten over 160,000 hits, and because that specifically talks to what I think a Star Trek show should be, that episode, and Far Beyond the Stars and First Contact as well. So let's get into this, and let's talk about Star Trek Discovery. In addition, Star Trek Discovery stars two actors that I've worked with. One is Anthony Rapp, who hasn't yet debuted on the new show, but he will, as the first openly gay character on Star Trek. I wrote an episode of Lazarus Man that starred him. In fact, I cast him in that episode, and that's also on Mr. Sci-Fi, so you can watch that in its entirety as well. And Doug Jones, who stars in Space Command, which is the big project I've been shooting, and you can check out a lot of our Space Command material on the Mr. Sci-Fi videos, and you can see some of Doug's amazing performance. We're currently in post on that and pitching it as a show, and I personally think he's much more wonderful in Space Command, and it utilizes his talents much better than Star Trek Discovery so far has. So let me get into the nuts and bolts. Because I'm in Africa, Star Trek Discovery is on Netflix, not CBS Interactive, and so I've watched the first two episodes, which is what they've released so far on Netflix here, and just watched them in the last day. I just watched the second one just now, and let me give a little prelude. And here's the thing. Star Trek has a great opportunity and also a great trap. And here's what they are. From the moment Star Trek debuted, the episodes were unlike anything that had been on television before. And week after week after week, there were stories that no one had ever done before. No one had done anything remotely like them before. And they were phenomenal and commenting on real life. It was during the Vietnam War. It was during the Civil Rights Movement. It was a time of great upheaval in society. And Star Trek was commenting on it and saying we can create a better world, a better future. And it had African American leads, it had Asian American leads. Great stuff, great stuff. But it still had three white guys in the primary roles, so it was of its era, but it also had a lot of possibility. So I was very aware of the possibilities of Star Trek from the beginning. And when City on the Edge of Forever debuted, I was astonished by it. It really molded me very, very profoundly. But the challenge of Star Trek and the great opportunity of Star Trek was that you could come up with a story that no one had ever seen before, that commented profoundly on life, and was something that would really move people and affect them deeply, and perhaps even change their lives for the better, give them a possibility of how they perhaps could create a better future in the real world. And many people went on to become astronauts and so forth. So for instance, when I pitched to Star Trek The Next Generation, the thing I came up with was, okay, you have the Prime Directive, and we see cultures that the Enterprise can be on a par with, like the Klingons or the Romulans or the Vulcans, and they're above board about who they are and what they're doing. And then cultures that are below a certain level, they have to hide themselves. And I said, but you've never done a story where the Prime Directive switches off and the Enterprise is sent to make first contact. And that was, they'd never thought of that one. And so that was my first sale to Star Trek. And then the second one, much more profound, was Theodore Sturgeon, who had been a writer for Star Trek. He wrote Amok Time and Shore Leave. He was a great science fiction writer. He wrote for the pulp magazines of the 50s, Galaxy, Magazine Fantasy and Science Fiction, etc., Astounding. And he was my mentor when I was a teenager, and in fact 2 of his books have my photo of him on them as his author's photo. And he was a dear friend and a great guy, and I wanted to pay homage to the writers of the 50s, the writers writing for the magazines like Heinlein, Asimov, Bradbury, Ted Sturgeon, Frederick Pohl, Paul Anderson, on and on. Harlan Ellison started in those magazines as well, as did Richard Matheson. And I wanted to show what that world was like, and the fact that there wouldn't be a Star Trek or a Star Wars without those amazing visionaries who were writing for a penny a word, 5 cents a word. They were not getting rich. And, but also I wanted to talk about why science fiction matters, and why writing our hope for the future creates a hopeful future, creates a better future in the real world. And so Far Beyond the Stars was that, and I'm very proud to have come up with it and to have it be out in the world. I think it's terrific. I'm very pleased with how they did it. And then I did the Star Trek episode with George Takei, and that was done without a studio or a network. And again, that was my view of what Star Trek could do, because most people, when they watch it, are moved to tears. George Takei does a phenomenal job. So, and it was a Star Trek story we had never seen before. It was something fresh, something original, something very close to my heart. It was my truth. And I took everything I had, but I'm very proud. I mean, in terms of me bringing my full creative gifts to it, but I'm very, very proud of it. And you can watch it and form your own opinion of it. But Star Trek Discovery, and so I said there's great opportunity with Star Trek and a great trap. And the trap is that if you're not careful, that because there have been so many Star Trek stories now, hundreds, if not thousands, of Star Trek stories, given all of the series they've done, all of the movies they've done, all of the books, comic books, etc., which are not canon, but still, they exist. You can just go over old territory. There's so many stories, so much to know about, and coming up with something fresh, something truthful, something new, something powerful, very challenging. In a way, Battlestar Galactica, the Ron Moore version, was his response to Star Trek, his saying, okay, let's comment on our world and do all the things we weren't allowed to do on Star Trek. So it's sort of the anti-Star Trek, but still fueling that enormous creative gift and creative output. So here's Star Trek Discovery. So for me, and I speak as someone who also came up with the Bible and the outline for the Star Trek Captain Sulu series that Michael Reeves and Winston Engel and I worked on. And we pitched that to CBS. And again, I'll post that sometime soon so people can read it and see who the characters would have been and what the plot would have been. And we worked out the entire 2-hour pilot. And it dealt with Klingons and Klingon space, but in a very different way from what the new Star Trek Discovery series is doing. So let me start with the positives. It's beautifully produced. The visual effects are terrific. The visual design is very strong. It looks like a feature. It really looks like a feature. And whereas you may disagree with some of the design elements, I'm not that fond of the new Klingons in terms of the design. It reminds me a lot of the sequel to Pitch Black in terms of that design aesthetic, very, very ridgy and sharp edges and metal and all of that. But it's still talented, heartfelt. They're trying for something different. You really can't fault them, or you can fault them, but why? Why do that? But everyone's clearly putting in a lot of work and a lot of heart into the new Star Trek. So, and also the fact that it has a black female lead is great. Many of you know that when Gene Roddenberry did the original pilot of Star Trek, he had a character named Number One, who was the second in command of the Enterprise, and she was a woman, played by Majel Barrett, and that character would have been much more interesting than Nurse Chapel, which was the default role that Majel Barrett, who was Roddenberry's mistress at the time, later his wife. The network insisted that they didn't like her performance or the character, or whatever. Versions differ, and so she was removed as a character. But then Roddenberry created Nurse Chapel to throw her a bone. But it was a very kind of a whiny character, and she was always pining after Mr. Spock, and not nearly the role that number one would have been. So the idea, basically, that Brian Fuller and the others on Star Trek Discovery took was, well, let's take that character, make her the lead, essentially, and they cast a black actress in the lead, which is, I think, great. And my friend Christina Moses, who is starring, she starred in Containment recently. She's been starring in the original. She's going to star in Condor in the fall, and Mission Control, 2 new shows. But she actually auditioned for this role on Star Trek Discovery and didn't get it. I personally think she would have been better than the actress they did cast, because the actress they cast, she's striking looking, she's distinctive, but I just don't believe most of what she's saying. When she and her captain are talking, supposedly they've been together for 7 years. I don't believe they have. I don't believe there's a relationship there. There's no warmth. For one thing, what's missing, they act like they care about each other. I mean, act in quotes, but you don't feel it. It's not like, McCoy cared about Kirk, Spock cared about Kirk. You believe that emotional triumvirate in the original show, and there's not that glue, there's not that connective tissue yet. And Doug Jones, I love Doug. He's in Space Command playing Dor Nevin, a synthetic. He's terrific, and I plan to have him back. Very much plan to have him back. He and I are in very active communication now, but. And he's going to be in Shape of Water, and Guillermo's new film, and I'm sure he'll be terrific in that. But I don't think this role utilizes him well. It's kind of another persnickety character, a little like Odo, but he's like from a prey species, so supposedly like cowardly. But that's a little thing in the first one. Overly cautious, fight or flight. He always wants to have flight. And then the second episode he comes through. But again, they missed opportunities with him. Like, for instance, when our heroine goes out in a spacesuit and she's exposed to radiation and she's going to die, he could have gone out and saved her, which would have established more of a bond, that he has courage. Could have done it, didn't do it. So, okay. But of course, see, this also speaks to the new structure of television, which is, originally, episodes had to begin and end within their hour. They couldn't build, you couldn't have arcs, because in syndication they would be shown out of order, so you could never have a story that went beyond its original episode. Episode 1 of Star Trek, or you could say the second pilot at least, is interchangeable with the 79th episode of the original Star Trek. There's no growth, there's no sequels as such. But then in recent times, they saw there was a financial viability, or it was an added bonus to have shows arc, so people would buy the set, watch the entire show, etc. So now episodes don't end in their hour, and as a result, they take a long time to get to the point. Some shows, like Westworld, I think was absolutely terrific. I thought it was a great show, and the second season, we'll see what they do. But that show, I thought, built and went back and forth in time incredibly well, and the acting was superlative. And Game of Thrones, I think, has really found its footing. There were some fits and starts in different seasons, too much nudity, gratuitously, too much sadism, gratuitously, torture, but they seem to really be on track now. I love the work they're doing. I love the cast, phenomenal actors. But on Star Trek Discovery so far, now let's also remember in context that Star Trek The Next Generation took a year to get going. I mean, the first season, all of us were watching and saying, Jesus, I hope they find their way, and they did. Michael Piller came aboard. He brought aboard many great writers, Ron Moore, on and on. I mean, Brian Fuller cut his teeth on that show. Ira Behr was spectacular. Hans Beimler, Ricky Manning, many talented writers. And almost all of them went on to become showrunners. And they did brilliant episodes. Then DS9, I thought Ira ran a great writing staff on that. Renee Echeverria was another great writer. But then Star Trek Voyager felt very tired. I don't think they really found their way. They had some great actors. Bob Picardo, who's in Voyager, is in Space Command as well. He's terrific to work with. And Enterprise, of course, finally sort of found its way in the 4th season, but by then it was canceled. It didn't run the full 7. And then in terms of the features, there's good Star Trek features, there's bad ones. I love Wrath of Khan. I like the director's cut very much of Star Trek, the motion picture. If you haven't seen the director's cut, go out and buy the DVD, because that's really the ultimate wonderful version, not the theatrical cut, which is much weaker. But back to Star Trek Discovery. So okay, so the lead actress playing Michael. Here's several challenges. One is her parents were killed in a Klingon raid. She's being raised on Vulcan by Sarek. Maybe eventually he'll mention Spock. It is his son. He also has a second son, Lawrence Luckinbill from Star Trek, whatever 5, which no one talks about because it was such an awful movie. But somehow Sarek is not mentioning any of these kids he's got, particularly Spock. You think he'd mention him a bit, or he'd be in the picture somewhere? But no. But maybe they'll get around to it. There's definitely ways they could that would be very, very interesting, but we'll see. Now also, an interesting thing is they found all of these outtakes and other alternate takes from the original Star Trek series, thousands and thousands and thousands of minutes of these outtakes. There was from the Roddenberry vaults. It was a set released last year of alternate scenes, longer scenes, bloopers, etc. Really wonderful stuff. But again, they have this wonderful trove of great material that they could use if they chose to, perhaps. But anyway, be that as it may. Several right choices they're making. As I said, the production values are great. The design is not bad. The fact that it's set a few years before the original show is interesting. But again, the problem is, okay, it's not first contact with the Klingons, which might have been interesting. It's like second contact with the Klingons. Okay, Klingons just kind of still boring. I mean, they go from point A to point B to point A to point B. Okay, they're warriors. They don't want to be dishonored. They don't want to be polluted. Blah 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 blah. Okay, boring. I mean, also, how is it commenting on our world? They're probably going to comment on our world, I guess, but in a kind of very uninteresting, not profound way so far. Maybe they'll get to it. I hope so. We'll see. But the characters aren't connecting really. There's not warmth. There's not humor. It's cold. It's a very cold show. The Star Trek movies are interesting. JJ's Star Trek movies, a lot of people hate them. I liked the first one a lot. I thought JJ avoided a lot of landmines. I thought the visual look of it was very good. And Star Trek Discovery is still using a lot of lens flare and so forth. We've got some lens flare in Space Command because it makes a shot kind of interesting, but it is a danger to fall into as a visual cliche. But it's funny because this Star Trek Discovery takes place in the Star Trek universe from the TV shows and the original movies, not JJ's Star Trek, but it's using the visual vocabulary of JJ's movies with lens flare and so forth. It looks visually much more like JJ's movies than the other Star Trek canon. So the first episode was very talky. I didn't believe anything anyone said, even Doug Jones, and I love Doug. I mean, he's working hard. They're making him walk on tiptoe, which makes him taller, but boy, it must be killing his legs and his hips and his back. Would have been better to give him a heel, which they could have taken, like a green screen heel that they could have taken out. I know it's an optical thing, optical budget, but gee, kind of cut him a break. But the second one was better because it had more action. The plot was okay, but still, there's a lot of goofiness. It's sort of like, okay, she's able to have a hole in her little cage and suck through to a door. Really wouldn't work. I'm sure all the scientists out there watching that were groaning. That somehow it would go from point A to point B through a vacuum. It's really not how it was work. She'd be sucked out into that vacuum, but that wouldn't necessarily guarantee she'd get through that other door, I don't think. And also, I don't think she'd be able to do that without physical damage of some kind. I mean, also she doesn't prep for it, in terms of breathing or she's a very externalized actress. I don't believe the inner life of that actor, that character. Like when she's sobbing, and again, these are spoilers. I mean, if you haven't seen these episodes, don't watch this. Stop it right now. But when her and by the way, Michelle Yeoh, I love her in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. She's terrific. She's one of the great martial arts actresses of all time. And yet she's in a fight with a Klingon. You really can't see stuff happening. So I think she probably has a skill level way beyond what they showed her as doing. And given her skill level, it was hard to believe that the Klingon could just so easily kill her. Also, here's another thing which is so stupid, and it's a Star Trek cliche, and they do it a million times. It's like, okay, you've got a crew of how many hundreds of people, and you send the captain and the second in command to fight these Klingons on a Klingon ship. Now you've got, with their transport, it looked like there were at least 6 pads for the transport. Why don't you at least send 6 guys on this mission? I mean, really? Why not? Why are you sending 2 people to fight the entire Klingon crew? Kind of goofy, and here's the other thing that's wrong, or problematical. the set pieces are running the show. So it's like, okay, we're going to have a set piece where this happens, a set piece where that happens, a set piece where that happens, but there's no... The strength of a lot of Star Trek was there's a central notion to an episode, a central heart to an episode. I don't know. I'm not seeing the philosophical depth yet, the insight, the profundity yet. I'm hoping it will be there. Because again, certain Star Trek series were better than others. Voyager, very problematical show, but some wonderful actresses and actors. And Roxanne Dawson I really liked. I liked Seven of Nine for all of her, all the way people carp about her. But, and Bob Picardo, as I said, was terrific. But in Star Trek Discovery, she's going to end up on another ship, of course, with another captain. There's a real interesting question, because they keep having these goofy climaxes at the end of episodes, cliffhangers. So she's now been sentenced to life imprisonment and stripped of her rank. So clearly, probably by the next episode, that will be countermanded, and so it becomes a paper tiger, and we all know it because we all know what the show is. So, and also here's another question. It's a few years before the original Star Trek, so we aren't, other than the Vulcans and Klingons, we're not seeing other races we know are there, but we're seeing all these other races we've never seen before, like Doug Jones's race. Well, why didn't we ever see him in the later Star Trek incarnations? So, it becomes, and to be fair, they are in a bit of a catch-22, because, and rightfully, they have to make it look like a modern show. It can't look like it was produced in 1966, and so it can't really be a direct arrow to the original Star Trek. Though the phaser design is nice. It's a combination of the laser that's in the original pilot and the phaser that's in the later incarnation of the show in the original Star Trek. So not a bad idea. And the spacesuit looked great. I've seen some of these props and the spacesuit in person at Comic-Con, and they were gorgeous. But the basic bottom line is, I wish that I were working on the new Star Trek, because I think I might be able to, do some of the things I'm talking about, which I'd really love to do. But beyond that, I'm going to give them time. We all are. We're going to watch the show. We're going to see where it goes. We're going to give them some rope. See if it becomes the show we all want it to be. Everyone was working hard. There's no one walking through it. No one's phoning it in. Everyone's trying really hard. It's thrilling to be on a Star Trek show, of course. They're using some of the original sound effects from the original show, which I think is clever, the audio landscape. And, so we'll give it time, we'll give it room, we'll see where the characters are. It took a while for Spock to find himself as a character. If you watch The Man Trap, you'll see that McCoy and Kirk's friendship was just starting. They were trying to figure out who the hell they were. Though Shatner was always strong. From the beginning, he had a real strong grasp of who Kirk was. And again, I always say that William Shatner is the greatest bad actor ever. He's astonishing. And and you can see he's the only one who's able to pull off what he pulls off with his affectations, with all of his William Shatnerisms. When you see people in the Star Trek fan films try to imitate him, it comes off as so hokey and bad because they're imitating Shatner, and really no one can pull that off other than William Shatner. He's phenomenal in that way. And so I love the job he did on Star Trek. And Leonard Nimoy was the perfect one to offset him. DeForest Kelley was the perfect one to offset the other two. There was a huge, the fascinating thing about the original Star Trek, because when I wrote Star Trek New Voyages, World Enough in Time, I never thought I'd get to write Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Sulu, Chekhov, all of those characters. And what you find, Uhura, and what you find, and Scotty, what you find with those 7 characters, or 7 I think it is, they all speak differently from each other. Their lines are never interchangeable. You cannot put a McCoy line in Spock's mouth. You cannot put a Chekhov line in Uhura's mouth. They are totally distinctive, and they have totally specific personalities, which is wonderful. The actors in the original Star Trek were wonderful. The characters were wonderful. And the fact that those actors and those characters are so linked to this day speaks to what a great job Gene Roddenberry did and his team did, Gene Kuhn and Dorothy Fontana, and that first group of writers who were so strong, David Gerrold and Harlan Ellison and Richard Matheson and George Clayton Johnson, and on and on. It was a phenomenal show, great directors, great acting, revolutionary visual effects. Now people will think they're very hokey. They were not at the time. No television show had ever done visual effects at that level, ever. They really changed the way TV was made. And so with Star Trek Discovery, we'll see. Maybe I'll get a phone call. Nicholas Meyer, whom I know is on the show. Doug Jones, of course, is on the show. If you think I should be on the show, let them know, because I would love to roll up my sleeves and put in my day's work. So I think that's about it. I'll probably comment more about Star Trek Discovery as time goes on. The directing's not bad. The shifting back and forth at time is okay. But again, what I was saying, just to finish a point, Klingons are a paper tiger. And I wouldn't, if I were going to do it, I wouldn't have done the Klingons. I wouldn't have covered the Klingon-human war. I don't think it's a great choice. I don't think most people who have not lived through war know how to write war. I think you want someone who really knows what they're talking about. Additionally, having her grow up on Vulcan, and she starts as not emotional, and she learns how to be emotional, or she's a kid and she's emotional, but then she's not. It's like we've seen all of this stuff with Spock, and there's not. I think my point is there's not enough freshness yet. There's not enough newness yet. I'm hoping there will be, we'll see. We'll see. And but that's it from me right now. It was a great honor to work on Star Trek to the little degree that I have, but I love that universe. The other thing I will say. I was mentioning it to Elaine earlier today, is that Star Trek has now reached a point of fame and of success where it's like Sherlock Holmes or Tarzan or Hamlet or any of them, where there'll be endless opportunities to have new versions over and over and over again, whether Star Trek Discovery succeeds or fails, whether the new Star Trek films succeed or fail, because they're getting kind of tired. Star Trek Into Darkness was less great than the first one. The third one was less great than the second one, or whatever. Motorcycles really, well, I happen to have this motorcycle on my spaceship. Do you really? How interesting. What an odd thing to have. But I digress. But whether any of these succeed or fail, there will be other Star Trek shows, other Star Trek movies. It will continue into the future because it has established itself as one of the great universes, one of the great storylines. And I'm very glad of that. I'm very, very glad of that. And Paramount may have shut down, by and large, the Star Trek fan films, or certainly curtailed them. That's a shame, but I think Star Trek Continues did some very good work, and Star Trek New Voyages / Phase 2 did some very good work. It'll all continue, and we'll all see where it goes. I'm very honored to have gotten a chance to work with the amazing actors I've worked with on Star Trek. They were spectacular, superlative, and I'll be working with many of them again in the future. So that's it for now. Mr. Sci-Fi, Marc Zicree of Space Command, Marc Zicree of Star Trek. Please subscribe to the Mr. Sci-Fi YouTube channel. You will hear many, many, many more of my opinions on science fiction, TV shows, movies, and books. I'll post something very soon about Blade Runner, the new Blade Runner prequels, and the Blade Runner feature that comes out next week. And I'll also be posting about Space Command, what's happening with it, a lot's happening with it, and James Cameron. There's some James Cameron news that I'll be talking about real soon, so that's going to be very interesting too. So that's it for now. Talk to you soon. Have a great time, and live long and prosper. Take care. Bye-bye.